So what do microbes actually do in the soil? The first thing, I mean, we've got trials to support all of these elements, which we'll come on to. I mean, the first thing is soil structure, which is so important for water retention and for oxygen getting into the soil and just the root structures and everything like that. The second one is nutrients, as I've started to describe with the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle. Carbon sequestration is an important part of the role that microbes play. And the fourth thing is building in resilience. So we've got examples of how they do that in each case. The first one, changing soil structure. Microbes attract earthworms. Earthworms like to eat microbes, and they're a very handy food source. And they also have a symbiotic relationship with them. People who've dissected earthworms find there are microbes living inside them, and they help to digest food. Earthworms are like chickens. They don't have teeth, but they have a crop, and they have all the mechanisms to break up soil internally. The microbes help them do that, to turn organic matter into humus, which the plant can then access. And what they do is they break up the soil structure and turn it into something useful. So there are three different types of worm. There are epigeic worms that live in the surface, and they turn nutrient-rich material and take it down into the ground. So they start the process. And then there are endogeic earthworms. These are doing sort of the main work of moving stuff around and taking that top material and turning it into something more akin to humus. And then finally, there are anesic worms, which are the big long ones where you see a worm cast on a lawn in the morning. That's an anesic worm that can burrow down several feet. And they're very important for getting moisture and oxygen down deep into the soil. And roots will actually use those holes to get down into the nutrients way below the surface. So they're all working away, and microbes help them do that. This is an example. We did some pasture trials in the New Forest earlier in the year, in the early spring. And this was the soil we found. This was permanent pasture, and basically it was very claggy. We found 300 psi plus compaction, about 3 inches down from the surface. Very, very little chance for the roots to get through. It was dense. And we found 5 very slow juvenile earthworms in a standard spadeful. And we went back 3 months later, having done some work. We did some subsoiling, where we just subsoiled the ground, didn't do anything else. And then we also subsoiled and injected a solution of microbes just below the compaction layer. And then we looked at those separately. So the first one, this was just subsoiled. So we got rid of the compaction layer, but there was a lighter structure, but it was still relatively dense. You can see some cracks opening up there. The roots were going down a little bit further. We still only had 5 rather slow juvenile earthworms, not much going on the earthworm front. And then this was the sample the same day, 3 months later, after we'd done the subsoiling. And this was subsoil with microbes. There was no compaction. We had a completely different soil structure, very open, crumb, and the earthworm count was amazing. At 15 active earthworms, including 2 adults, and that was just in 3 months from doing those trials. So that's when I really woke up to the fact that this was something exciting. You know, I'd heard Jeff talking about it, but I realised when I got my hands on the soil that there was a massive difference in the way things had gone. And looking at that in more detail, there's a few things that come out. The soil structure is different, and that's partly because of mycorrhizal fungi producing this substance called glomalin, the amazing thing, and that basically glues all of the elements in the soil together and creates an aggregate, which then has pores in between where water can draw down, and you get a vacuum which then draws air down underneath the surface as well. So all of that gives you more water infiltration, a lot more organic matter in the soil because of the worm activity, less runoff, less pollution, and better plant growth. So that soil structure is really crucial. The worms themselves produce polysaccharides, which is like a long chain sugar, which microbes love to eat. so that attracts more of them, which keeps the worms happy in other ways. So the whole system works in balance, back to the balance of all the microbes that Jeff talked about right at the beginning. It's crucial in biodiversity below and above ground. Just a bit on the compaction layer. I know Sam and I talked about this at Macaroni Farm, that plants just can't get through that dense layer, and it comes from a loss of soil structure. And Jeff, I'm sure, will kick in with stories of Africa, where they've never used a tractor on the land, but they still get compaction. Yeah. So and it just prevents roots getting through to the nutrients down below, and they end up not growing as well. So the soil structure is really important from that point of view. So this is some evidence of how plants will grow better with microbes around. This is a white clover trial that we did early in the summer. Sorry, white mustard, I should say. And this is just after 1 week with a microbial compost. And we achieved 40% more plant growth with microbes than without, 30% more root length. We had, as you can see, is two completely separate plants. One's got 4 leaves, the other's only just got 2. And the other thing to notice is the colour, the vivid green from the chlorophyll, which was really evident in the microbe watered plants. We also did some pot trials with potatoes, and you can see here the difference in the same period. This is 2 months after the first shoots. We've got a much higher density of potato leaves, and we ended up with a 9% increase in yield from those samples as well. And all that was watering in with microbes and nothing else. We just watered in water on the left and microbes and water on the right. A little bit on the nutrient take-up. Mycorrhizal fungi extend the root system. They're also made of carbon, which I'll come on to in a minute. So they absorb a lot of carbon in the soil. And one of the great things about the whole regenerative agricultural movement is that we are reducing the amount of cultivation that goes on in the soil. That allows these hyphae to stay around. If you plough, then every year you break up that structure and it has to start again from scratch. But having those long tendrils that you can see in the image, transferring food and nutrients and water around the system helps with biodiversity, and it gets plants to help each other, which again I'll come on to in a minute. The third area is carbon sequestration. Carbon capture is obviously very sexy at the moment, and there's various ways that microbes help in that. Mineralized carbon, most of the microbes in the soil are actually dead. They've died over the years, and they mineralize carbon because they're made of, a large proportion of them is made of carbon, and they go into the soil, and then that's captured in there for use later on. The mycorrhizal fungi we talked about, they extend the root system, but they're made of carbon in a big way, and so they're locking more carbon in. Cover crop will build organic matter and provides benefits. One of the key things is having a cover crop means that you're always feeding the microbe population with sugar exudate. So bare soil means the microbes don't get any energy from the sun, they're not getting any carbon coming down through the roots, and so they end up either dying or going elsewhere where they can get food. So a cover crop is important for building carbon in the soil, but it's also very good for keeping the microbes happy and keeping them fed. And then, as we discussed, photosynthesis draws down carbon dioxide. Plants grow, capture carbon in the plant, and then when they die down, then we end up with carbon being taken down by the worms. So resilience is the final area, and this is crucial. And I've only really, in the last sort of few months, realised just how important soil biodiversity is compared to, I mean, everyone talks about what's above ground, but down below it's important as well. The picture on the left of the screen is of the Jena experiment, which was, it's been carried out for decades in Eastern Europe, East Germany, or former East Germany. And they took, I think, 118 plots shown in that picture and planted different combinations of plants in them. And one of the things they found was that the plants where there's more biodiversity, so the more species of plants in a plot, the better those plots tend to do under stress. And they had various drought periods and found that monocultures and places with only a few different species struggled to keep going in the drought, whereas areas where you had high biodiversity and lots of different species, they did extremely well even in drought conditions. The same thing happens down below as well. And if you look at the picture down below, which shows different root structures for different crops, you have things like sainfoin that has very, very long tap roots, and chicory. So they do a very good job of breaking up the soil and getting down into the very depths of the soil. And then you have other plants like some clovers have very sort of fibrous root systems. And so they're very good at holding the surface together and stopping erosion. And if you combine that with mycorrhizal fungi doing their thing in between those, and a wide variety of bacteria as well, because all of those plants will attract different bacteria to them. Different microbes will prefer different root systems, and different plants will be able to do different jobs. And what they will do is they will basically work together. So that's why these multi-species plots do best, because plants that really enjoy drought will support plants that are really struggling, and they will help them to get access to nutrients and water through the system of fungi. And in the same way, on the top of the plants, you've got the leaves, and there's a thing called photosynthesis capacity, which is based on the amount of leaf that you've got. It's also the color of the leaves, because that will filter out different colors of light. The height of the plant will mean that at certain times of day, certain plants get more light than others. And so all of that gives you, when you've got biodiversity, you've got lots of different shaped leaves, lots of different colors, lots of different heights, and they'll all work together to maximize the height. Just going back to the Jena experiment, one of the things that after about 10 years, they had a massive flood, meters of water on the surface, and they were really upset because they thought they would lose the whole experiment. But as the water drained away, after a couple of weeks, they realized that it was still those same plots with lots of diversity that were able to survive the floods as well. And they came back much more quickly than the other plots. So it really does make a huge difference in all sorts of ways when plants are stressed. So the practicalities and what we're trying to achieve here, we don't want to talk too much about regenerative agriculture because some people get turned off by it, but I think this applies to all reduced tillage, and in the future I think we're going to have to see massive changes in agriculture because of the cost of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and we're seeing even die-hard plough merchants still looking to reduce their diesel costs by doing a bit less. So whatever part of the cycle you're on in going towards regenerative, I think there's still something to be gained from this sort of work. And so what we're looking to do is to reduce the time it takes to recover the yields when you start to go towards a low till, no till system. And I've been listening to podcasts and farming today, and all sorts of reading all sorts of stories about farmers saying, my father started this regenerative process 25 years ago, and here we are, we've put 2% more organic matter into the soil, and it takes a long time if you just let it happen. But the trials that we did in the New Forest show the improvement in structure in months. And by putting a vibrant population of microbes in, rather than waiting for them to wake up and slowly increase as you increase the organic matter, we're putting microbes in that are raring to go, they're full of life, as you saw in that early video. And they've got food with them in the form of molasses that allows them to get going quickly while they adjust to their environment. And so what we're hoping to do is close that yield gap and bring the time frame from tens of years into 3 or 4 years, where you're back at the same yield as you were before, switching to a less invasive system. There are various ways of doing this, and we've got 2 partners, one in Germany and Austria and one in Spain, and they have slightly different, well, very different approaches to getting microbes into the ground. The Germans are really into cover crop mulching, and so they have like a rotivator mechanism or a what do they call them? Cover crop crimper, cover crop crimper.
Yeah.
And what that does is basically there's a spray bar which you can see in the bottom right hand corner, which is just behind the blade area. And as you run across the cover crop and break it without actually pulling the roots out, you spray microbes on top of it and you seal them into a lovely composting mix. And so you've still got the root structure in the system that's still feeding carbon down into the soil. And then on top of that, you've got this microbial mix of cover crops and soil, which will then attract the earthworms, and they'll come and pick all that stuff up and take it down deep into the soil. The Spanish love composting, and they're very keen on getting compost onto vineyard soils, for example. They've had huge success on vineyards getting compost, and it has the benefit of you've already got organic matter ready to go. It's humus, and you've then got microbes again attracting earthworms, and it's very quickly incorporated into the soil with all those nutrients ready to feed the plants. So how we work, we're looking to put microbes in whatever form is appropriate. If there's compaction layers in the soil, then subsoiling is obviously a good way forward. If you haven't got compaction, then there are various options to get microbes on, spraying on, or using cover crops. And we're looking really to develop long-term relationships with farmers. Once you put the microbes in, you don't just walk away. It's not like a chemical fertilizer. It's not a silver bullet, but they will be there. And as long as they're fed and as long as they're kept in contact with living roots, then they will stay around and they will continue to do their job. But they will need organic matter feeding in to keep them going year on year. And we've also got the option of providing a brewing system and help with, if groups of farmers want to create their own capacity for brewing, then we can help with that and produce some other culture for them. So I've said it's not a silver bullet. You still need to go in and do all the farming practices that are necessary, liming and various other things that are important depending on your soil conditions. But the great thing is that none of our products are messed about with. They're not made by people in white coats. It's Jeff and me, and we go and brew them, and they come from the soil and they go back into the soil. So it's very much working in partnership with nature.